Don't come to the party tonight. He doesn't want to see you there. Avon said it while fixing her hair in the bathroom mirror, casual as discussing the weather. Her reflection caught mine for half a second before she looked away, focusing on some imaginary flaw in her makeup. All right, I said. That's it. No argument, no questions, no wounded pride bleeding through my voice, just acknowledgement, simple as ordering coffee. She paused, mascara wand halfway to her lashes. Maybe she expected a fight. Maybe she wanted one. But I've learned that the most powerful response to casual cruelty is casual acceptance. It's just, Porter thinks it might be awkward, with the promotion announcements and all the office politics. Porter Keller, her boss. 43 years old, drives a Tesla, throws parties in his downtown penthouse where the wine costs more than my monthly salary. The kind of man who uses phrases like synergistic solutions and paradigm shifts without irony. Makes sense, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Wouldn't want to make things awkward. Avon's shoulders relaxed. She'd expected resistance, prepared for it, probably rehearsed this conversation in her head. My easy agreement threw her off balance. You're not upset? Why would I be upset? You're right. I don't belong at your boss's party. She finished her makeup in silence while I watched from the doorway. 5 years together, 2 of them married, and I could read her tells like a poker player reads cards. The way she bit her lower lip when lying, the slight flush on her neck when she felt guilty, the way she avoided eye contact when she knew she was crossing a line. All 3 tells were firing at once. I'll probably be late, she said, slipping into her black dress. The one I bought her for our anniversary. These work things tend to drag on. I'll leave the light on. She kissed my cheek on her way out, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like checking off a box than showing affection. The door clicked shut behind her, and I listened to her heels clicking down the hallway until the elevator arrived. Then I got to work. My name is Drake Torrin, and I'm what you might call methodical. It comes with the territory when you're an IT systems engineer. You learn to think in flowcharts, to anticipate problems before they crash your network, to have backup plans for your backup plans. I started with the engagement ring. It sat in the jewelry box on Avon's dresser, a 2-carat solitaire that cost me 3 months' salary. I'd saved for 8 months to buy it, working overtime and skipping lunches until I had enough cash to walk into Tiffany's and buy something worthy of the woman I thought I was marrying. The receipt was still in my filing cabinet, along with the insurance papers and the appraisal. All in my name, all my property, legally speaking. I slipped the ring into its original box and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Next came the practical matters. Joint bank account? I transferred my half to my personal checking, leaving exactly what Avon had contributed. Joint credit cards? I called and removed my name from the accounts. Utilities, cable, internet? All transferred to her name alone, effective immediately. The lease was trickier. We'd both signed, but I'd paid the security deposit and the first 3 months up front. A quick call to our landlord clarified the situation. If one party wanted out, they could terminate their portion of the lease with 30 days' notice and forfeit their share of the deposit. I'll take the forfeit, I told him. You sure? That's $1,500. I'm sure. I packed systematically, the way I approach any complex project. Essential items first, clothes, toiletries, important documents. Then personal effects, books, photos from before I met Avon, my collection of vintage computer equipment. Finally, anything of sentimental or monetary value that belonged to me. It took 3 hours to erase myself from our shared life. My phone buzzed constantly while I worked. Text messages from Avon, starting casual and growing increasingly frantic. Having fun! Wish you were here. Porter asked about you. Told him you were busy with work stuff. This is so boring. Can't wait to get home. Leaving soon. Wine was terrible anyway. Drake? Are you awake? Why aren't you answering? I'm coming home now. Something feels wrong. I read each message as it arrived but didn't respond. What was there to say? She'd made her choice when she decided I wasn't worth bringing to her boss's party. I was just making that choice permanent. By the time I heard her key in the lock, I was sitting in my car in the parking garage, engine running, watching her frantic silhouette through the apartment window. She called my phone while I watched her search the empty rooms. I let it ring. The Riverside Arms wasn't exactly a step up from the place I'd shared with Avon, but it had 3 things going for it: month-to-month lease, no questions asked, and a view of something other than the parking lot. Granted, that something was a dumpster and a chain-link fence, but at least it had character. "This place looks like where dreams go to take a nap," I muttered, dropping my boxes onto the worn carpet. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for 18 hours. Avon had left 47 voicemails, sent 63 text messages, and apparently called my mother, my work, and anyone else who might know where I was. I listened to exactly one voicemail. "Drake, please, just talk to me. I know you're upset about the party, but this is crazy. You can't just disappear over something so stupid. Call me back. We need to talk about this like adults." Like adults. As if I was the one acting childish. I deleted the rest without listening. My best friend Jace showed up around noon with coffee and donuts, taking in my new accommodations with the expression of someone evaluating a crime scene. "Well," he said, settling into my only chair, "it's definitely a place where things happen. Bad things, mostly. The best kind." Jace worked maintenance for the city, which meant he had stories about every neighborhood and an opinion about every landlord. "So you want to tell me why you're living in what appears to be a converted storage unit?" I filled him in while we ate donuts that tasted like they'd been made sometime during the previous administration. Jace listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small noises of disgust. "Porter Keller," he said when I finished. "Tall guy, drives the Tesla, lives in that glass tower downtown. You know him?" "Know of him. We did some work on his building last year. Guy's a piece of work. Treats the maintenance staff like we're invisible unless something breaks, then suddenly we're his best friends." Jace crumpled up his napkin and tossed it toward my empty trash can. "So what's the plan?" "Plan? Don't play dumb. You didn't just walk away from 5 years and a 2-carat ring without having a plan. This is you we're talking about. You probably have spreadsheets." He wasn't wrong. I'd always been the type to think 3 moves ahead, to consider contingencies and prepare for multiple scenarios. But this time felt different. This time, I was making it up as I went. "I want to know what's really going on," I said finally. "You think there's more to it than just not wanting you at the party?" "I know there is." You should have seen her face, Jace. The way she avoided looking at me, the way she kept touching her neck. She was lying about something bigger than office politics. Jace pulled out his phone and started typing. "Porter Keller, right? Let's see what the internet knows about your wife's boss." What the internet knew was plenty. Porter's company, Keller Marketing Solutions, had a robust social media presence. Their Instagram was full of office parties, team-building events, and professional glamour shots of their staff, including Avon. "Look at this," Jace said, scrolling through photos from the past 6 months. "Here's your wife at some company retreat. Here she is at another party, and another one." The photos showed Avon laughing, dancing, raising champagne glasses with her colleagues. In most of them, Porter was somewhere in the frame, usually close enough to suggest familiarity beyond a typical boss-employee relationship. "Could be innocent," Jace said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Could be." I studied a photo from 3 weeks ago, some kind of client celebration at an upscale restaurant. Avon and Porter were seated next to each other, her hand resting on his arm while she laughed at something he'd said. "But probably isn't." My phone rang. Avon again. This time I answered. "Drake?" "Oh, thank God, I've been so worried. Where are you? I came home and all your stuff was gone and the landlord said you'd terminated your lease and I don't understand what's happening." Her voice was high and breathless, words tumbling over each other in her rush to get them out. "I'm fine," I said. "Fine?" "You disappeared in the middle of the night without saying anything. How is that fine?" "You said your boss didn't want me at the party. I figured he probably didn't want me in your life either. I was just being considerate." Silence stretched between us. Jace watched my face, trying to read the conversation from my side of it. "That's not... Drake, you're being ridiculous. It was one party. One stupid work party that didn't mean anything. If it didn't mean anything, why couldn't I come?" Another pause. "I told you. Porter thought it would be awkward." "Right, awkward." I looked at Jace, who was still scrolling through photos on his phone. "Because having your husband around makes things awkward when you're trying to impress your boss." "It wasn't like that." "What was it like, Avon?" It was complicated. There are office dynamics you don't understand." "Try me." "Drake, please. Can we just meet somewhere and talk about this? I miss you. I want to fix this." The thing about being an engineer is that you learn to recognize patterns. System failures follow predictable paths. When a network starts dropping packets, you don't need to see the damaged cable to know where to look for the problem. "I don't think there's anything to fix," I said. "I think everything is working exactly the way it's supposed to." I hung up and turned off my phone. Jace looked up from his scrolling. "Want to see something interesting?" He handed me his phone, opened to Porter's personal Instagram account. The most recent post was from last night, a group photo from the party, taken in what looked like a penthouse living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Avon was in the photo, standing next to Porter, his arm around her waist. "Could still be innocent," Jace said. "Could be." But it wasn't. I could see it in the way she leaned into him, the way her hand rested on his chest, the way they looked at each other instead of the camera. I'd been married to Avon for 2 years, engaged for 1 before that, dating for 2 before that. I knew the difference between professional courtesy and personal intimacy. This was personal. "So," Jace said, taking his phone back, "what now?" "Now I get to work." The thing about being invisible is that people forget you're there. They have conversations they shouldn't have, do things they shouldn't do, make assumptions about privacy that aren't necessarily true. Being an IT engineer makes you especially invisible. People see the uniform, the tool bag, the badge that says technical services, and their brains categorize you as part of the background, like a piece of furniture that occasionally fixes their computer, which is why nobody paid attention when I showed up at Avon's office building Tuesday morning. "Service call for the 14th floor, I told the security guard, flashing my old contractor ID from when I'd done freelance work. "Network connectivity issues." He waved me through without looking up from his crossword puzzle. The 14th floor housed Keller Marketing Solutions, a maze of glass-walled offices and open workspace designed to look innovative and collaborative. In reality, it looked like a fishbowl where everyone could watch everyone else pretend to work. I found the server room and got to work, not on fixing anything, but on understanding the network topology. Every email, every file transfer, every instant message flowed through the equipment in this room, and every piece of equipment kept logs. I wasn't planning to hack anything. That would be illegal, and I'm not that kind of engineer. But understanding how information flowed through the system, that was just professional curiosity. 20 minutes later, I had what I needed: a complete map of the company's digital infrastructure and a clear understanding of their backup procedures. More importantly, I'd confirmed that their internal messaging system automatically archived everything for compliance purposes. Those archives would be interesting reading for the right person. Someone like the HR director, for instance, or the company's board of directors. I was packing up my tools when I heard voices in the hallway. "Don't think he suspects anything, but we need to be more careful." Avon's voice, low and worried. "Relax," came the reply. Porter's voice, confident and dismissive. "He's a tech guy. They're not exactly known for their emotional intelligence. You don't know Drake like I do. He's smarter than he looks. Smart enough to disappear in the middle of the night instead of having an adult conversation? They were walking past the server room, voices fading as they moved down the hall. I cracked the door and watched them enter Porter's corner office, noting how he put his hand on the small of her back as she walked through the door. Definitely not professional courtesy. I finished my fake service call and left through the lobby, nodding to the same security guard who still didn't look up from his crossword. Back at my apartment, I called the building's actual IT support company. "Hi, this is Drake Torin with Keller Marketing. We're having some network issues on the 14th floor. Can you check your logs and see if anyone was working on our systems this morning?" "Let me check. No, we don't have any service calls scheduled for Keller Marketing today. Did someone claim to be from our company?" "No, just checking. We had some connectivity issues and wanted to make sure it wasn't related to scheduled maintenance." "Want me to send someone over to take a look?" "That's okay. It seems to be resolved now." I hung up and smiled. In about an hour, Keller Marketing's IT department would get a call from their support company asking about unauthorized access to their server room. That would trigger a security review, which would involve checking badge logs, reviewing security footage, and asking uncomfortable questions about who had access to their systems. It wouldn't accomplish much by itself, but it would make people nervous. And nervous people make mistakes. My phone rang. Avon again. "Drake, I know you're angry, but this silent treatment is getting ridiculous. I talked to your mother. She's worried sick." "You called my mother?" "I didn't know what else to do. You won't talk to me, you won't tell me where you're staying. I thought something might have happened to you." "Something did happen to me. I realized I was married to someone who doesn't want me around." "That's not true." "Isn't it? When's the last time you invited me to a work event, Avon? When's the last time you mentioned me to your colleagues? When's the last time you acted like being married to me was something you were proud of instead of something you had to manage?" Silence. "I thought so," I said. "Drake, please. I know I've been distant lately, but it's not what you think. Work has been stressful, and Porter's been putting a lot of pressure on everyone, and I've just been trying to keep my head down and do my job." "Is that what you call it?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Forget I said anything." "No, you obviously meant something. What are you implying?" I could hear the anger creeping into her voice, the defensive edge that appeared whenever she felt cornered. Good. Angry people make even more mistakes than nervous people. "I'm not implying anything, Avon. I'm just saying that if keeping your head down and doing your job means pretending your husband doesn't exist, then maybe we have different definitions of marriage. That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" "Fair would have been having this conversation before I had to find out from Instagram that my wife spends more time with her boss than she does with me." Another pause. "You've been looking at my social media?" "I've been trying to understand why my own wife doesn't want me around. Social media seemed like a good place to start." "Drake, you're being paranoid." "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I'm being realistic." I hung up and turned off my phone again. Jace showed up an hour later with Chinese takeout and updates from his own reconnaissance mission. "Talked to my buddy Carlos, who works security at Porter's building," he said, unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour pork. "Guess who's been signing in as a business guest about 3 times a week for the past 2 months? Let me guess. Your wife. Always after hours. Always staying late. Carlos says they usually leave together." I ate my lo mein and processed this information. 3 times a week for 2 months. That was a lot of late-night business meetings. "There's more," Jace said. "Carlos also mentioned that Porter's going through a divorce. Has been for about 6 months now. Apparently his wife found some text messages she didn't like. Interesting timing." "Very interesting. Want to hear the really interesting part?" I nodded. "Porter's divorce lawyer is the same guy who handled my cousin's separation last year. Small world, right? Anyway, My cousin says this lawyer specializes in cases involving infidelity, specifically cases where one spouse needs to prove the other spouse is cheating. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and I didn't like what I was seeing. So, Porter's wife thinks he's cheating. Porter's been having after-hours meetings with my wife, and my wife suddenly doesn't want me around her work events. That's about the size of it. I pushed my food around my plate, appetite gone. They're not even being careful about it. Why should they be? From their perspective, you're just the boring husband who works with computers and doesn't pay attention to anything important. Right up until I disappeared in the middle of the night. Right up until then. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll regret it. I showed it to Jace, who read it twice before handing it back. Well, he said. Looks like you got their attention. The anonymous threat was amateur hour, the kind of thing someone sends when they're scared but don't know how to be properly intimidating. I traced the number in about 30 seconds. It was from one of those disposable phone apps, purchased with a credit card registered to Porter Keller. Not exactly a criminal mastermind, I told Jace over coffee the next morning. What are you going to do about it? Nothing direct. But I think it's time to expand my research. Public records are a beautiful thing when you know how to search them. Porter's divorce filing was a matter of public record, and while the specific details were sealed, the basic information was available to anyone who knew where to look. His wife, Margaret Keller, had filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences, but had also requested an investigation into marital assets and potential hidden income. That suggested she suspected financial impropriety, along with the infidelity. More interesting was Porter's counterfiling, which claimed Margaret was making false and malicious accusations in an attempt to gain leverage in property division. He'd hired an expensive law firm that specialized in defending high-net-worth individuals against what they diplomatically called aggressive divorce tactics. I spent the morning building a timeline. Porter's marriage had started falling apart around the same time Avon got promoted to senior account manager. Avon had started working late about a month after that. The Instagram photos of them together started appearing 6 weeks ago. The pattern was clear, but patterns weren't proof. For proof, I needed to get creative. The Riverside Arms might have been a step down in terms of amenities, but it had one advantage over my old place. The building manager, Eddie, was the kind of guy who knew everyone and everything that happened in a 6-block radius. You want to know about Porter Keller? Eddie said when I brought up the subject. That guy's a piece of work. Lives in the Meridian Tower, right? Glass penthouse? Thinks he owns the world? That's the one. Yeah, I know him. Used to date a girl who worked at the coffee shop in his building. She had stories. Eddie was in his 60s, a former cop who'd retired to building management and brought his investigative instincts with him. He knew which tenants were behind on rent, which ones were dealing substances, and which ones were cheating on their spouses. What kind of stories? The kind where a married guy brings different women to his place when his wife's out of town. My friend Sarah, she worked the morning shift at the coffee shop. She'd see them leaving together, all disheveled and trying to act casual. Recently? Past couple months, yeah. Always the same woman lately. Pretty brunette, works in marketing or something. Sarah said she seemed nice, but you know how it is. Nice women don't usually sneak around with married men unless they think they're getting something out of it. I thanked Eddie and went back to my apartment to think. Avon wasn't stupid. She knew Porter was married, knew he was going through a divorce, knew that getting involved with him was risky both professionally and personally. But she was doing it anyway, which meant she thought the potential reward was worth the risk. The question was, what reward? My phone rang. This time, it wasn't Avon. Mr. Torrin? This is Margaret Keller. I believe we need to talk. Porter's wife had a voice like expensive whiskey, smooth, sophisticated, with an undertone that suggested she could cut you if she wanted to. About what? About your wife and my husband. I think we might be able to help each other. We met at a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where business deals and conspiracies were planned over overpriced lattes. Margaret Keller was exactly what I'd expected, blonde, polished, wearing clothes that cost more than most people's rent. But there was something tired around her eyes, a weariness that expensive makeup couldn't quite hide. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, settling into the booth across from me. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Porter thinks he's being clever, thinks I don't know about his little affairs. But when you've been married to someone for 15 years, you learn to read the signs." "What signs?" "Late meetings that don't appear on his calendar, business trips to cities where the company doesn't have clients, credit card charges for restaurants and hotels that he can't quite explain." She sipped her latte and studied my face. "And then there are the photos." "Photos?" "Social media is wonderful, isn't it? People post everything these days thinking nobody's paying attention. But I pay attention, Mr. Torrin. I pay very close attention." She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots from Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Photos I'd seen before, but also some I hadn't. Avon and Porter at restaurants, at bars, at what looked like a weekend getaway in wine country. "She's pretty," Margaret said. Porter always did prefer brunettes. "How long have you known?" "About your wife specifically?" 2 months? "About Porter's cheating in general?" "Years." She put her phone away and leaned back in her seat. "The difference is that this time he's being sloppy. This time he's leaving evidence." "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that will be very helpful in my divorce proceedings. The kind that will also be very interesting to the board of directors at his company." I was starting to understand why she'd wanted to meet. "You want me to help you prove they're having an affair. I want us to help each other. You get proof that your wife is cheating, I get proof that my husband is violating his employment contract." "Employment contract?" Porter's company has very strict policies about relationships between supervisors and subordinates. It's a liability issue. If the board finds out he's been sleeping with an employee, especially one he promoted, they'll have to fire him. The pieces clicked into place. Porter wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was risking his career for Avon. And Avon wasn't just having an affair, she was betting her future on a man who might lose everything if they got caught. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Access. Porter's careful around me, but he might be less careful around you. You know your wife's schedule, her habits, her weaknesses. I know Porter's." "And in exchange?" "In exchange, we both get what we want. You get your divorce, I get mine, and they both get exactly what they deserve." Margaret Keller wasn't asking me to help her get revenge. She was asking me to help her get justice. I thought about Avon, about the way she'd looked at me when she told me not to come to the party, the casual cruelty of it, the assumption that I'd just accept whatever scraps of attention she was willing to give me. "What did you have in mind?" Margaret's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Porter and Avon thought they were being discreet, but they were actually following a predictable pattern. Thursday nights, they met at a wine bar called Vintages. Friday afternoons, they had client meetings that lasted until evening. Saturday mornings, when Margaret was at her yoga class, Avon would visit Porter's penthouse. "They think they're so clever," Margaret said, showing me the schedule she'd compiled, "but they're creatures of habit, just like everyone else." The first phase was documentation. Margaret had already hired a private investigator, but she needed someone with technical skills to gather digital evidence. That's where I came in. "Porter's laptop," she said. "He brings it home every night, leaves it on his desk in the study that shares a wall with my walk-in closet." "You want me to hack his laptop?" "I want you to help me access my own home network. Technically, I own half of everything in that penthouse, including the wireless router." It was a legal gray area, but Margaret's lawyer had assured her that evidence gathered from jointly owned property would be admissible in divorce proceedings. I spent Saturday morning in Margaret's walk-in closet, which was larger than my current apartment, installing a wireless access point that would give me remote access to their home network. Porter was at the gym, following his usual weekend routine, while Margaret provided lookout from the living room. "This feels like a spy movie," she said when I finished. "Spy movies are more exciting. In real life, most of this stuff is just patience and planning." By Sunday night, I had access to Porter's laptop, his email, and his text messages. What I found confirmed everything we'd suspected and revealed things that were worse than I'd imagined. The affair had started 3 months ago, right after Porter promoted Avon to senior account manager. But it wasn't just an affair, it was a business arrangement. Porter had been embezzling money from client accounts, small amounts that he thought wouldn't be noticed. Avon wasn't just his lover, she was his accomplice. "Look at this," I told Margaret, showing her the email chain where Porter explained how the scheme worked. "He's been skimming money from client retainer accounts and funneling it through fake vendor payments. Avon's been creating the false invoices." "How much money?" "About $200,000 over the past year." Margaret stared at the screen, her face pale. "That's not just an affair. That's fraud. That's prison time." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the implications. This wasn't just about broken marriages anymore. This was about serious criminal activity. "What do we do?" Margaret asked. "We finish this." The final phase of the plan required perfect timing. Porter's company was having their quarterly board meeting on Friday, with all the major investors and board members in attendance. Margaret's divorce lawyer was scheduled to present evidence of Porter's infidelity the same day. But first, we needed to force them into making a mistake. I called Avon on Thursday morning. "Drake, I can't believe you're finally calling me back. I've been so worried." "We need to talk." "Yes, we do. There's so much I need to explain, so much you don't understand." "I understand more than you think." Silence. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know about Porter. I know about the late nights, the business trips, the weekend meetings. I know about all of it. Drake, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth. For once in the past 3 months, I want you to tell me the truth." Another long pause. "Can we meet, please? I can explain everything." "Tonight. Vintage's Wine Bar, 8 o'clock. "How did you know about 8 o'clock, Avon? Don't be late." I hung up and called Margaret. "It's done. She'll be there tonight." "And Porter?" "He'll follow. Men like Porter can't resist the chance to be the hero in someone else's drama." That evening, I arrived at Vintage's early and positioned myself at a table with a clear view of the entrance. Margaret was across the street in her car, ready to document whatever happened next. Avon arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, looking nervous and overdressed in a black cocktail dress that I'd never seen before. She spotted me immediately and walked over, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for coming." She ordered white wine. I stuck with coffee. "Drake, I need you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. It got complicated." "Complicated how?" "Porter and we work closely together. He's been mentoring me, helping me advance my career. And yes, we've gotten close, but it's not what you think." "What do I think, Avon?" "You think we're having an affair." "Are you?" She looked down at her wine glass, avoiding my eyes. "It's complicated." "That's not an answer." "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes, we are." I felt something settle in my chest, a cold certainty that replaced the anger I'd been carrying for the past week. Hearing her admit it was almost a relief. "How long?" 3 months, since my promotion." "Did the promotion have anything to do with it?" "No, Drake. I earned that promotion. I worked hard for it." "I'm sure you did." She looked up sharply, catching the sarcasm in my voice. It wasn't like that. What was it like? It was... Porter understood me in ways that you never did. He appreciated my ambition, my drive. He made me feel like I could accomplish anything. And I didn't? You made me feel safe, comfortable. But comfortable isn't enough anymore, Drake. I want more than safe. Porter arrived 20 minutes into our conversation, just as I'd predicted. He walked straight to our table with the confident stride of a man who thought he was in control of the situation. Avon, is everything all right? Porter, what are you doing here? You texted me, said you were meeting your husband and might need backup. Avon looked confused. I didn't text you. Porter pulled out his phone and showed her the message. This isn't from you? I smiled. That would be from me. I borrowed your phone number from Avon's contacts. Porter's face darkened. You've got some nerve. Sit down, Porter. We need to talk. I don't need to do anything, and I don't appreciate being manipulated. Really? Because manipulation seems to be your specialty. He remained standing, looming over the table in what I assumed was meant to be an intimidating pose. I think this conversation is over. I think it's just getting started. Especially the part about the $200,000 you've been stealing from your clients. Porter went very still. Avon looked between us, confusion clear on her face. What's he talking about? She asked. He's fishing, Porter said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Am I? Because I have emails, Porter. I have bank records. I have invoices for vendors that don't exist and payments for services that were never rendered. I pulled out my phone and showed them both a screenshot of one of Porter's emails. I have everything. Avon read the email, her face growing pale. Porter, what is this? It's not what it looks like. It looks like embezzlement. It's complicated. That seems to be your favorite phrase, I said. Porter sat down heavily, the fight going out of him. How did you get these? Does it matter? The question is, what are you going to do about it? What do you want? I want you to understand that your little affair has consequences. For both of you. Avon was still staring at her phone, reading through the evidence I'd gathered. Porter, these invoices... I created these invoices. You told me they were for legitimate consulting work. They were. For companies that don't exist? Porter didn't answer. Oh my God, Avon whispered. I'm an accessory to fraud. You're both accessories to fraud, I corrected. The question is whether you want to be accessories to fraud who cooperate with the investigation or accessories to fraud who go to prison. What investigation? Porter demanded. I smiled and nodded toward the window. Margaret was walking into the restaurant, followed by two men in suits who had the unmistakable look of federal agents. The one that starts right now. The federal agents were Margaret's masterstroke. She'd contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit 3 days earlier, armed with the evidence I'd gathered from Porter's laptop. Embezzling client funds wasn't just a civil matter, it was wire fraud, a federal crime that carried serious prison time. Agent Rodriguez was tall and thin with the kind of mustache that suggested he'd been watching too many crime procedurals. Agent Chen was shorter, stockier, and had the expression of someone who'd seen every possible variation of white-collar crime and wasn't impressed by any of them. Porter Keller, Agent Rodriguez said, approaching our table. We need to talk. Porter looked like he was going to be sick. About what? About $200,000 in missing client funds, about fraudulent vendor payments, about conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Avon stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need to leave. Actually, Ms. Bardell, we need to talk to you too, Agent Chen said. You created the false invoices, didn't you? I didn't know they were false. You created invoices for companies that don't exist. You processed payments to vendors that have no business licenses, no tax records, no legitimate addresses. Are you telling us you didn't think that was suspicious? Avon looked at Porter, then at me, then back at the agents. I want a lawyer. That's your right, Agent Rodriguez said. But I should mention that cooperation at this stage could be very beneficial when it comes to sentencing recommendations. The next hour was a blur of questions, accusations, and increasingly desperate explanations. Porter tried to claim the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that he'd been planning to return the money, that it was just a temporary loan against future commissions. Avon alternated between claiming ignorance and blaming Porter for misleading her. She insisted she'd thought the vendor payments were legitimate, that Porter had told her they were for consulting services and market research. The agents listened patiently, taking notes and asking follow-up questions that made it clear they already knew most of the answers. Here's what's going to happen, Agent Chen said finally. We're going to need both of you to come downtown for formal interviews. We're going to need access to your computers, your phones, your bank records. We're going to need a complete accounting of every transaction, every payment, every communication related to this scheme. And if we cooperate? Porter asked. If you cooperate fully and help us recover the stolen funds, the prosecutor might be willing to discuss reduced charges. If you don't cooperate, Agent Rodriguez shrugged. Wire fraud carries up to 20 years in federal prison. They left with Porter and Avon in tow, both of them looking shell-shocked and defeated. Margaret and I watched from the restaurant window as they were loaded into separate cars and driven away. Well, Margaret said, settling back into her chair, that went better than expected. Think they'll flip on each other? Oh, absolutely. Porter will try to pin everything on Avon, and she'll try to pin everything on him. By tomorrow morning, they'll both be competing to see who can cooperate more enthusiastically. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. I showed it to Margaret, who read it and laughed. Porter? Probably, though it might be Avon. Hard to tell when people are desperate. What are you going to do? Nothing. What can they do to me? I'm not the one facing federal charges. Margaret smiled and raised her wine glass. To getting what we deserve. To getting what we deserve. We finished our drinks and walked outside into the cool evening air. The city looked different somehow, cleaner and brighter than it had a week ago. What happens now? I asked. Now I file for divorce, Porter goes to prison, and you get to start over. Margaret checked her watch. Speaking of which, I should go. Early morning tomorrow. Court? Better. I'm meeting with the board of directors at Porter's company. Turns out they're very interested in learning about their embezzling executive. She walked away into the night, leaving me alone on the sidewalk outside Vintage's. My phone rang. Drake? My mother's voice, worried and confused. Avon called me. She said she's been arrested? She said you had something to do with it? It's complicated, Mom. She's asking me to post bail. She says she doesn't have anyone else to call. Don't. Drake, whatever problems you two are having, she stole money, Mom. She committed fraud. She's going to prison. Silence. Are you sure? I'm sure. What about you? Are you all right? I looked up at the city skyline, at the lights in the windows of 1,000 apartments where people were living their lives, making their choices, dealing with their consequences. Yeah, I said. I think I'm going to be fine. I walked back to my car and drove home to my converted storage unit with its view of the dumpster and the chain-link fence. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Most were from Avon, begging me to help her, to post bail, to hire her a lawyer, to somehow fix the mess she'd made of her life. I deleted them all without reading past the first few words. There was also a voicemail from Margaret. Drake, it's Margaret. Thought you'd want to know. The board fired Porter this morning. Effective immediately. No severance, no benefits. They're also filing a civil suit to recover the stolen money. Oh, and his wife, well, ex-wife now, is going to be very comfortable in the divorce settlement. Anyway, thank you for everything. I made coffee and sat by my window, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Torrin, this is Janet Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story about the arrests last night, and we understand you were instrumental in exposing the fraud. Would you be willing to do an interview? No comment. But surely you must feel vindicated. Your wife and her boss caught red-handed facing serious federal charges? No comment. I hung up and turned off my phone. The truth was, I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant or satisfied or any of the things I'd expected to feel when this was all over. Mostly, I felt tired. Avon had made her choice when she decided I wasn't worth bringing to her boss's party. She'd made it again when she decided to help him steal money. She'd made it every day for 3 months when she chose to lie to me instead of telling me the truth. I'd just made sure she lived with the consequences. That afternoon, I drove to the storage unit where I'd put the furniture from our old apartment. Most of it had been ours together, but there were a few pieces that were mine from before we met. A bookshelf my father had built, a desk I'd bought with my first paycheck, a leather chair that had belonged to my grandfather. I spent the rest of the day moving my real furniture into my new apartment, replacing the temporary pieces I'd bought at thrift stores. It was slow work, but satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. By evening, the place looked less like a storage unit and more like a home. My phone buzzed. Another text from Avon. Please, Drake. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. I've always loved you. We can get through this together. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about the woman I'd married and the woman who'd sent this text. They felt like different people. Maybe they were. I typed back a single word. No. Then I blocked her number and deleted her contact information. Outside my window, the sun was setting behind the chain-link fence, casting everything in golden light. Even the dumpster looked beautiful in that light. I made myself dinner, opened a book I'd been meaning to read, and settled into my grandfather's chair. For the first time in months, I was exactly where I wanted to be.